Hello, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I'm Richard Battersby with the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition, and I'm here to welcome you to the third installment of the Electric Vehicle How-To series. Today, we're going to have part 3, Preparing for the Next Level. This educational series was put together by the Long Beach, Columbia, Willamette, San Francisco, Western Washington, East Bay, and Utah Clean Cities as a collaborative effort to help raise education and awareness of alternative fuel vehicles for fleets throughout the United States. This second series builds upon the first successful series on renewable fuels and is just the latest offering from the Clean Cities Coalition to help keep people informed and move the needle on alternative fuel deployment. Thank you for joining us today. Next slide, please. Hey, look, it's me. Yes, I've magically gotten younger, but I am Richard Battersby with the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition. Some of you on the line may know me from my day job with the City of Oakland. Thank you again for joining us today. Next slide. First off, the agenda. I've already conducted the introduction. We're going to go over a brief Clean Cities overview for those of you that may not be as familiar with the program yet. And of course, we've got 3 wonderful speakers today, Tony Cademarti, McDonald, and John Mikulin, and we'll be getting into that in further detail. Today's webinar will also feature a Q&A. Please, if you have questions throughout the presentation, access the chat box and ask your question. Questions may be answered by response in the chat box during the presentation, or at the end of the 3 presentations, we will also hold a Q&A session where the speakers and panelists can answer questions directly. Next slide, please. I'm trying to do something with the volume here. Hopefully this is better. Just a few housekeeping rules. I mentioned with the chat, there are approximately 80 attendees today. You can chat with other attendees in the chat box, but it can become overwhelming, so please try to limit that. Ask your questions using the questions box, and feel free to lodge your question during the presentation. We'll get to those during the Q&A section. And most importantly, this webinar, like others in the series, will be archived and made available to all attendees after the presentation. Next slide, please. I mentioned today's speakers. We have Tony Cademarti from Everett Transit, McDonald from UPS, and John Mikulin from the US EPA. Next slide. And now for a brief Clean Cities overview. Next slide, please. I mentioned the 6 coalitions that are putting this event on today. This map illustrates the 90-plus Clean Cities coalitions throughout the United States. You can see that most metropolitan areas have a local Clean Cities coalition. So we would encourage you, if you've not already, make the connection with your local Clean Cities coalition. Clean Cities coalitions can help you with numerous projects, provide assistance, and help throughout alternative fuel deployment. I'm going to try something else. Hopefully the sound is better. We had some connection issues with cell phones, so we're going to a desktop. So now I'm hearing it's worse. Yes, no?
Sounds great, Richard.
Oh, perfect. Hey, go to the next slide. Sorry about that, folks. Everything works great during test mode, but when you go live, you never know what's going to happen. So anyhow, showing the creativity and flexibility of the Clean Cities Coalition, evidently we've solved the audio problem. I want to mention specifically the resources and tools that are available through your local Clean Cities Coalition, the network across the United States that actually rolls up under the Federal Department of Energy. One of those most valuable tools is the Alternative Fuel Data Center. As you can see, all alternative fuels are represented, and Clean Cities is fuel agnostic, which means we support all alternative fuels There is no one solution that works for every fleet in every location, and we recognize and acknowledge that. Also not shown on this slide, the EPA fueleconomy.gov or fuelmilepergallon.gov is a great website for doing fuel economy and emissions comparisons. Next slide, please. Again, this is the electric vehicle how-to series. There have already been 2 installments. This is the 3rd and final installment, preparing for the next level. So thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, please. Speakers, as we move through these presentations, attendees, please remember to log your questions in the chat box. Next slide, please. And first up, our first presenter is Tony Cademarti, the Fleet Program Manager from Everett Transit. Tony's been dedicated to fleet maintenance since 2015. He's a prior Naval Surface Warfare officer with over a decade of experience in the Navy. So thank you for your service, Tony. His duties include, but are not limited to, creating vehicle and equipment specifications, including transit buses and paratransit vehicles, processing new vehicle and equipment orders, vendor management, fuel infrastructure management, electric vehicle infrastructure planning, tracking and disposal of surplus vehicles and equipment, special projects coordination, and acting as the city's green vehicle coordinator. I'm not sure what he does in his spare time because he doesn't have any. He assists the vehicle maintenance manager in managing a mixed-duty fleet of approximately 900 units, including police and fire, with 11 main fueling sites throughout the city. So without further ado, let's hand the program off to Tony for his presentation.
And I'm now off mute. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for being in my presentation. I will try to make this a little more interesting than the dry normal PowerPoint that people normally see, so we'll see how that goes. So everyone's probably tired of seeing my picture, so we're going to move on to the next slide. All right, so basically we're going to be talking about our experiences we've had at Everett Transit with our electric transit buses. Just to start out with a disclaimer, my experience has solely been with Proterra branded buses built in the last several years. So please take that for what that is as I go through this. Otherwise, you're going to take it as a generic industry standard. I cannot say that it is. So this is just our experience with the buses that we have. All right, so here's currently where we're at. We have 7 Proterra 40-foot buses in service. We have 2 more on order for delivery in November. And we have 3 electric bus order pending in the, well, I said January, it's really the first quarter of 2021. It'll probably end up being February and March before the PO is cut. But that's what we're looking at right now. And then after that, there'll be 6 more electric buses under consideration. All these 9 buses, the 6 and the 3, are basically free to transit due to some useful paperwork that was done by our grants coordinator. We're getting the 80% fund from FTA, and then the match is going to be funded via the VW diesel mitigation funding. So, and then by 2023, 18 of our 36 or so buses will be electric, so half the fleet. And the goal by 2030 is that the fleet will be 100% electric. We will also be introducing our inductive charging starting in 2021. Our 3 electric bus order will be inductive charging. So that is another change that we'll get into. Some choices that were made. So when we started out, our first 4 bus order for electrics from Proterra were via an FTA partnership grant. We had to partner with the manufacturer. At the time, letters were sent, but I wasn't in charge of the project at the time. It was George Baxter, who's now retired. He sent out 3 letters, one to Proterra, one to Green Power, and one to BYD that were all on the state contract at the time. And the only response was from Proterra. So that's the one we ended up going with. Basically, we looked at depot charging versus on-route charging. and we saw the high costs and legal ownership issues of on-route charging, since some of the sites where we would put on-route charging would be like the mall or a college or places that we didn't own and didn't want to deal with the legal issues. And then the University of Texas Austin did a study for extended range buses with depot charging, and it was found to be a good fit. So based on those two, we decided to go with depot charging. Next slide. So overall, here's the reason we had to go with new buses. Not necessarily electric, but that's, you know, the way we went. We needed to replace a number of buses. We had 6 1996 vintage Orion buses, 6 2001 vintage Orions, and 3 2002 vintage Orions in the fleet. And they all were past their shelf life, and they all needed to be gone. Over the years, it had become more expedient to just spend federal maintenance dollars rather than replace buses, and so that's what was done. But these Orions were and are completely worn out. The only grants available at the time were for electric, which is kind of why we went that way to begin with. We did have diesel-electric hybrid buses in the fleet already, so we had experience with those. And then there was a public declaration of transition to fully electric by 2030. That was actually put out in the public, so we already talked about that earlier. So here's how we started out, how we implemented. So we started off with Proterra during our order. Now, over time, the ordering process for Proterra has changed. But when we started out, our first 4-bus order, they had a very complicated, very hard to understand Excel spreadsheet-based thing called a configurator. And you would pick options, and they were configured on this big Excel spreadsheet. But they don't do that anymore. But I'm just trying to explain that the process starts being more complicated, and they kind of streamlined it along the way. For infrastructure, you can work with the local utility, which is Snowpud for us. We had to bid out the process for the installation of conduit, wiring, chargers, and for the infrastructure. And we also had to think for the future, because it's always cheaper to put in the preps today than it is to pay tomorrow. So we put the groundwork for charging infrastructure. Basically, we put extra conduit or up to 12 chargers, even though we were only going to lay 4 at the time. And the chargers, we had originally planned to purchase our ChargePoint CPE 250s. We switched to Proterra PCS and dispenser systems. 2 reasons, really. One was that the CP 250s at the time were way delayed. And then Proterra came and said, you know, it's really better if you buy our system since it's our bus. So the decision was made to switch. Now, with that happened with that caused a reevaluation of the complete infrastructure program for the installation by PUD and by our independent person because it was now a major change to the project. So that slowed everything down by about 3 months. So lesson learned here is, once you've made a decision, unless there is no other option, don't change from what you're going to do, unless you're willing to accept the delay. Then we had to do training. There was training for drivers when they arrived, when the buses got here, which they did train the trainer style with a series of, I think it was about 6 or 8 drivers. And then the mechanics, there was 4 days of mechanics training that was done by a flyaway trainer. And we did it over a weekend. We did it Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to eliminate 2 days of the week that would have been spent. So that caused extra cost for overtime, which is something you've got to think about. And then we at the time didn't have much use for working on top of buses. So we didn't really have a fall protection system that would work for the top of a bus. So we ended up having to purchase a system through a very convoluted process. We ended up just buying a canned solution from Miller called a Sky Orb, which is pictured in the background. So that's another thing to think about. Okay, so lesson learned. So think about when you buy buses, right? It's not just buying a bus. Like normally you just go out to bid, oh, I'm buying a diesel bus. What you're buying when you change from a diesel or a hybrid bus that doesn't plug in, you're buying a system. You're buying the bus, the charging, the infrastructure, the training, the driver and the mechanic training. any building improvements you have to do. Like I said, the examples are here. The shop design, our lifts didn't work with these buses because we have independent suspension in the rear. Battery table, you have to have for removing and replacing the batteries. You have to have a shop charger that we didn't plan for. You have to new PPE. You've got fire flash gear, EH-rated boots. You've got unique parts and labor requirements. Your parts room has to expand. You have to find room for all the parts you have to stock. And then you have something like you never had to deal with before, like a large one-piece windshield that we still haven't really had a solution on how to replace yet. We're still working on that. Manufacturers starting to say no now. Before you tell Gillig what you want and they will make it happen because you're the customer. Now you're like, oh no, we don't use that brand of lighting, or no, you don't have that option available, even though every other bus you've ever bought has it. So be ready for that. Be ready for units you buy in 1 year to be different than the units you buy in another year. That hopefully they get better quality-wise. Our first 4 buses were basically, I felt like they were demo units when they got here. They weren't really ready for sale. They ran mostly when you babied them, required a lot of maintenance. They've gotten better over time, but the quality is improving every year we buy them. And then the drivers and the mechanics need to buy in. This is huge. Transit just expected to buy these things and then like, well, you're your employer, you're going to fix and drive them. Well, that didn't really work out very well. So getting their buy-in early is probably a good idea. Okay, so there's some brief ones here. These are a little more minor than the other ones over time here. We've got electromagnetic radiation concerns by drivers. Drivers are worried because they're sitting basically, next to a big battery and an electric motor. You get a magnetic field. The magnetic field's cut through your body. That may affect your body. That's perception. It wasn't real. We've tested. It's not a real thing. There's actual articles that are out there. I didn't link them here, but there are articles you can find online that have been done by actual universities and other formal studies that show that it's not a real concern. You're going to get customer complaints. People park next to you and your bus stops and starts next to them. Well, AM radio gets interference due to the starting of the electric motor. Composite body and 20-ply tires. It's a very stiff bus. It shakes. It rattles a bit. It's harsher when you hit a pothole. It's one of the things that's going to happen, especially when you go with the composite body bus. Charger and reliability. We had the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and 6th maybe, chargers that were ever sold by Proterra. The first was a Foothill Transit. So we had the teething pains of the first couple units that they ever sold. So be ready for, if you get an early charger, that you're going to have some reliability issues. What happened was Transit split the project between infrastructure and the bus. I didn't handle the infrastructure installation. I just got the chargers here and the buses here. In my opinion, it's a bad idea. It's a system. It should be completely controlled and managed by one project manager. Because you tend to lose, because everyone comes to the guy buying the bus anyway and says, well, when are the chargers being installed? That's the infrastructure guy. Why are you talking to me? So you end up becoming the middleman. So it's kind of pointless. And you're not an island. You can learn from other agencies. There's some examples there with some links if you want later on. But basically, Pierce, King County Metro, and now Santa Monica Big Blue Bus have now bought their first Gillig Electric. So, and there's even a newer story, I think, than this linked here to follow up on that bus. Okay, so here's our new future, just really quickly to go over it. We've got 2 more buses from Proterra on order, should be pending in November. We're going to try to buy 3 Gillig Electrics, 35-footers next year. So that's so we can compare the Gilligs to the Proterras for our next 6 bus order after that. Like I said, which shall reign supreme. Reliability is the thing for us. So which one is more reliable is the one that's going to win. Inductive charging has been integrated for the first time. And then that's the future we've already talked about. 18 by 2023 electric, and then all the fleet by 2030. Why are we purchasing more buses? Well, first of all, it's in compliance with our climate action plan, which is listed there. Diesel transit buses are the biggest contributor of the city to environmental impact due to emissions. So that is where the focus is going. Most of the focus is right now. There's more grant opportunities for electric and alternative fuel buses. Drivers and mechanics have more experience now, so we broke the barrier down on electric buses. Experience with the infrastructure requirements. We're old hat at this now, so if we have to add chargers, we know exactly what needs to be done now that we've done it. So it's not really a barrier anymore. Electric hydrogen fuel cell is the future. Diesel is what I call dying technology. I give it 50 to 100 years. Diesel will be gone. Just like anything else, like horse-drawn buggies and carriages. Unless you're Amish, you're not using them anymore. Support from the local PUD. Local PUDs has programs, grant opportunities, future EV only electrical rates that are going to be less expensive, and overall fleet modernization, hopefully monetary savings on repairs and maintenance. Right now, we just came out of warranty on our first 4 buses maybe 6 or 8 months ago. So we're starting to see some of the costs on some of these buses, and some of the newer ones are still under warranty. And what I'm told, rather expensive things are breaking early. So we'll see how that comes out, but hopefully it end up being monetary savings in the end. And I'm finally done. And just for trivia question, not anyone who was on the pre-call yesterday, what movie is this scene from? Yes, Flash Gordon, that's correct. Thank you for your attention today. Enjoy the rest of the presentations.
Well, thank you very much, Tony, and congratulations to our trivia contest winner. You've won free access to the 3rd installment of the Electric Vehicle How-To series. So enjoy the rest of the presentation today. Thanks again, Tony. Before I move on to the next presenter, I mentioned the 6 Clean Cities Coalition that jointly put this project together. But as with any team, there is definitely an all-star on this team. And I wanted to specifically thank Maddie Resnick, who's the program coordinator for Columbia-Willamette Coalition. It goes on behind the scenes, and she makes it look easy, but Maddie is basically the driving force behind us successfully migrating our previously live events to the online version. So thank you very much, Maddie. Moving right along with the program, up next we've got Michael McDonald, who's the Director of Sustainability and Government Affairs at UPS at their global headquarters in Atlanta. Alongside UPS's Corporate Maintenance and Engineering Department, Michael works to identify viable alternative fuel platforms to continually advance one of the industry's largest private alternative fuel and advanced technology fleets, a rolling laboratory of more than 10,000 vehicles that drive more than 1 million cleaner miles each business day. UPS has been a longtime partner and stakeholder of the Clean Cities Coalition, and more importantly than just being a leader in this space, UPS willingly shares what they've discovered in their 10,000 vehicle fleet rolling laboratory. And today we're going to learn about the latest developments from Mr. Michael McDonald. So without any further ado, let's begin your presentation.
Thank you, Richard and Clean Cities, for having me participate in this panel today. As everybody knows on the call, the reason you're on the call is because there's a lot going on between some of the legislation and preferences and fuel types. We are agnostic when it comes to fuel, using different fuels for different areas, different terrains, different climates. So just a couple things I put together for his presentation to kind of let you know what we're thinking and where we are in the process right now. Oops, sorry. These are two electric vehicles actually from 1930 and 1936. They're called Walker Electric. The one on the left side is actually, I believe it's in Los Angeles, and the one on the right side, I believe, actually is New York City. So this is one of those things that just by luck or happenstance, we kind of been in the alternative fuel business for a minute, as well as the package business. Again, my name is Michael McDonald. Today, some of the things I'll talk about is where we currently are with our alternative fuel makeup of equipment here, and maybe touch a little on what we have overseas, kind of what we've been working on in the past, and what we're looking at right now, and some of the challenges that come with everything. As Tony mentioned, anytime you have a new technology, there's pain that comes with it when you are one of the first folks to engage in that technology. Well, this slide is from the end of last year, where we stand with our sustainability and alternate fuel program. What I highlighted in red were the compressed natural gas, liquid natural gas, and propane. What I highlighted in blue was anything having to do with electric or electric hybrid. And it's just to kind of draw a distinction in what we've been doing with the natural gas and propanes, and what we're getting ready to do with electric, or have been subtly in the background working on with electric. You'll see by the numbers on the left side in the United States that we've been slowly building our alternative fuel fleet around, whether it be LNG first, and lately it's been compressed natural gas. That's where you've been seeing all the announcements that we've made over the past 2 years. And you'll see on the right side, that's our international fleet. The difference is with our international fleet, we don't own all of our vehicles. We have sometimes outside service providers that actually make the deliveries, and they're the ones who actually purchase the vehicle. So though we count these alternative fuel vehicles, they may not necessarily be ones that we own. But all the vehicles on the left side of the United States are vehicles that we actually own. This is just a chart of where we were since 2008, all in, and I'm sure the number's even higher. We spent probably in the neighborhood of $1 billion plus in investments, and that would include our CNG, LNG, and propane sites, the infrastructure that we put on our property to fuel these vehicles, but also just the amount of fuel we've used also in the past. And what I did not put on this slide was, in the last 2 years, we've also announced a total of 250 million gallons of equivalent to RNG to add to our CNG vehicles, on top of the CNG and LNG, actually, to bring the emissions even lower. And this is just a map I put in just for a footprint of where our stations are. You'll see pretty much in the center of the country, especially in the north, we don't have many stations at all. Like I mentioned previously, our CNG and LNG and propane, we actually put the sites on our property so we could control the fuel used. And also you'll see in the red, in the lower right, it will say natural gas tractors. An average last year, I think we calculated somewhere to the neighborhood of 7.5 million miles a week our natural gas vehicles were running. So you'll see, basically what I'm trying to say to you is, when we started with the LNG, it's kind of being at the same point as starting with electric now. We started small, we had a plan, we kind of went with the plan. Probably one of the major issues was the pain that we endured with the equipment when we first started, because like Tony mentioned, every time you have new equipment, there's a lot of bugs that need to be worked out, and irregardless of the vehicles that they use when they're testing them, it's never the same when you actually have them in your operation and you're running them every day It's a lot different running a vehicle, say for instance in New York City, where the roads probably aren't in the best condition, as opposed to maybe running it in another part of the country where the roads are smooth and flat and those kind of things. So even something as simple as terrain or the climate, whether it be heat or cold, make a huge difference in how your vehicle performs, especially when it's new equipment and they have not quite worked all the bugs out of it. So that was part of the past. And though I call it the past, we're still continuing our efforts with CNG. As I said before, it's been a very good venture for us. And so we will continue to use that unless we're forced to stop using it. So if you turn the page, we started probably a couple, 2 or 3 years ago, we started looking at electric vehicles. We got away from the vehicles in the 1930s because at the time, like anything else, gasoline became prevalent because it was cheaper, longer distances, the maintenance, those type things. So just recently, we flipped the page and we started looking at electric, pretty much to see the writing on the wall. You could see it start to pick up steam probably 2 or 3 years ago. So we decided through our rolling laboratory, like we call it, to take advantage of partnering with certain companies just to test out their vehicles, just in the onset that we didn't want to be left behind if something was to suddenly happen, that we are already heading towards electric and all of a sudden here it is. So this was like one of the companies that we are looking at right now. To be quite frank with you, they're out of Los Angeles, called Exos, previously called Thor. And you'll see it's on our regular body that we have. We had leased a couple of this Mitsubishi Fuso, 3 of them actually, and we put it each part of the country. And that was just basically to test out the technology. The size of the vehicle is not a vehicle that we normally use, but just to stay in the electric field, we were just looking at different technologies, different companies, and who was doing what. So the drivers were very pleased with this particular vehicle. And I think they announced this year that they were no longer going to build this vehicle, even though they would support what's currently out in the field. And then we just made an announcement in January that we partnered with something we don't do often. We partnered with a rival from overseas, and we basically pre-ordered 10,000 vehicles that I believe will start showing up next year or towards the end of next year. And if you look at this truck, it looks kind of like a UPS truck, but it has changed a little as the aerodynamics has changed a little, composite body, you know, just the shape itself. It's kind of like our old trucks, but the lines are smoother. And the reason is because as technology changes, you have to kind of look at what you're doing and what is it that you're trying to achieve. And down the road, this is a skateboard type platform, and what it kind of yields itself to, kind of like a Tesla tractor, or we're looking at things like collision mitigation, lane departure, like just the kind of features that come with like owning maybe an electric vehicle. You know, maybe looking at things like maybe updating the vehicle over the air and those type of things. So as the future comes and as the electric platforms increase, we want to try to take advantage of what also comes with that. But also when we talk about electric, battery electric gets a lot of press, but lately hydrogen electric fuel cell has also started to pick up with its press. And so we have been testing fuel cell. We've actually partnered to test also a Class 8 fuel cell. We're building a couple. We're not building them, but we're part of a project with building a couple hydrogen fuel cell delivery trucks also to actually just to see how they perform. Again, if things were to go in the realm of fuel cell, we don't want to be left behind with that either if it fits in our duty cycle. This is our idea of the perfect building for alternative fuel, where you take advantage of wind, solar, drop in renewable fuel, battery storage. This would be the, I guess you could say, the nirvana or the perfect building in today's environment. If you're trying to go to zero emissions or near zero emissions, this would be like the perfect building that we'd like to build. And just let me go forward. And actually, we are building a building which you will take advantage of several of those things that we're looking at. And we're looking to make this building a zero emissions building. It is being built in California as we speak. Of course, because of where we actually are with electricity and near zero technology and things like that, it won't be a zero emissions building right away because there are other things that need to take place. So kind of let's talk about infrastructure, because that's the building side of it. And to Tony's point, there are a couple things that you need to take into consideration when you talk about electricity and electrifying buildings. When you look at a bus depot and a UPS building, they're distinctly different in how you charge that vehicle. You could probably charge a bus, have post, charge the vehicle's overhead, maybe plug them in the side or the front. However the configuration is for a bus, and it could probably be done in the yard. When you look at our Class 8 fleet, you would have to charge those in the yard, but if you look at our delivery fleet, they need to be charged in the building. That being said, if you looked at this particular UPS building, and I really don't know what this is, but this is just to give you an idea. The way our buildings are set up is our vehicles are backed up to a dock. So somewhere between that dock, the walkway, and the conveyor belt behind it, you have to figure out where to put a charger. This one particular one is hanging off of a pole. That is not the optimal place for a charger to be, but this is one of the infrastructure issues that we have when it comes to actually the charging equipment within the building. We are looking at several options, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the things that you will struggle with when you're thinking about electrifying your fleet, because there's not one template that fits all. And there's also not one charger that fits all. Everything started out with AC chargers. Now they're going to, they're looking heavily at DC chargers as the standard. It seems like every time you turn around, every 6 months, it's a different type of charger with a different company. It started out where you had to contract 3 or 4 different people to have them do the infrastructure, get the power to the building and other things. And now you have companies that act as a turnkey operation where they take care of everything for you. One of the other things that you need to look for when you're electrifying a fleet is if your buildings like ours that are relatively older, you won't have the power availability in the building already. Chances are they'll have to dig up pavement to get it in the building, which when you speak to the companies that do that, they're generally a year to a year and a half out. So it's, if you make the decision today and you get the vehicles today, you're still looking at a year to a year and a half to even have the power in your building to hook up the vehicles that you've already paid for. So time and planning is very essential. This cannot be a knee-jerk operation or last minute. It's got to be well planned out. And also, again, to Tony's point, once you have a plan and you think you have all bases covered, it's probably a good idea to stick to that plan unless something goes very awry to change that plan. So just let me fast forward because I don't want to take up a lot of time. Some of the challenges that I just think about off the top of my head is the rapidly changing technology. 2 years ago, when we talked about electric and Tesla threw their hat into the ring, a lot of folks kind of weren't on board and really didn't think much of it. Now here we are, where electric was here. Legislatively in California, it's become a no option. And with 14 MOUs being signed across the country, that's the way it's going right now. But the thing is, what's available right now may not necessarily be what you get if you ordered a truck right now, because the technology is changing rapidly, whether it be to get more power out of a battery or trying to reduce weight or other things. So whoever you contract with to get a vehicle don't just look at what they have now, but it's a good idea to maybe quiz them on what the capabilities will be down the road to upgrade what you're buying now. I quickly touched on hardware installation. Depending on the setup of your business will determine your hardware options. Again, there's not one template that says you put a pole in the ground at your facility to have charging. So that's something you have to look at. Power infrastructure. Depending on at the age of your building, it will take a year to a year and a half or more to get on their schedule to have them run the power to your building. And the elusive cost of power, depending on which energy company you speak to, there's not really one size fits all, because they're still trying to figure it out also. Now, if you flip the switch from battery electric to hydrogen electric, hydrogen is still difficult to get your hands on. Most of it is by transportation truck. That's generally where a lot of the cost is. That makes the fuel kind of cost prohibitive right now. So that has a ways to go. When they get to a place where they can maybe start doing the hydrogen generation on property or in a stationary setup, that may bring the price of the fuel down, which make it maybe a lot more affordable. Right now, the supply part of it would be an issue for us if all things lined up. Again, time frame, if you're looking to buy a truck today, you need to figure out with the electric company or whoever you're speaking with, how long it would take them to actually get the power to your building for you to actually buy an electric truck and make it a good purchase for you that you could use now. And if you're a company of the size of UPS, there's a vehicle cycle, which when you buy a vehicle, you look at using that vehicle 15 to 20 years. And you also, when you order new vehicles, you have to put in for a slot to have them built. That's something else to take into consideration. If you're going to power up a building for electric, say this year, that means your vehicles have to already be ordered. So when that building is ready to go, the vehicles will also be here. And of course, there's the last but not least, the overarching issue that has not really been addressed fully yet, is when they have the rolling brownouts that are still very much in existence without many electric vehicles hooked up to the grid already. Thank you, and I apologize if I went over.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think that the map that you provided that showed the different alternative fuels in use throughout the United States really illustrates well the Clean Cities perspective that there is no one particular fuel that works better than the other across the board. So I commend you and UPS for thoroughly exploring and validating all the options, but then more importantly, putting them to use. And thank you for sharing that information with us today. Again, I'd like to remind our attendees, if you have questions that you'd like answered, please key them into the Q&A box. And we need to move on to the next slide, please. Our third and final speaker today is John Mikulin from EPA Region 9. John's no stranger to those in the alternative fuel industry. We've been working together with him over a decade, and he really is a presence at alternative fuel workshops and events, and we appreciate his support. I mentioned he's in Region 9, and they're heavily involved in alternative fuel vehicle deployment. John's presentation today is going to be on medium, heavy-duty, zero-emission vehicle deployment throughout the United States. So with that briefest of introduction, let's get into your presentation, John.
Thanks, Richard. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yes?
Sounds good.
Great, thank you. Again, thanks, Richard, and everyone at Clean Cities for inviting me to speak with everyone today. Again, I'm John Mikulin. I work for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I work in our Region 9 office in San Francisco, where I'm in our Air and Radiation Division in the Technology and Partnerships office. So that's enough about me. I have a lot of information to get through in the next few minutes. And I also have an appendix to this slide deck, which will be available as a reference for you all, with a lot more references and resources than I'll be able to cover in my brief 10 to 15 minute spiel here today. But again, the folks at Clean Cities asked me to come on and talk to you all a little bit about medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle development in the US. There's a lot going on in that space, and I'm going to try to cover the highlights as best I can in the next few minutes. First, I wanted to just touch on what I want to cover in my time here. And really, I wanted to start out with the why and the how from EPA's perspective. I think we had some really good perspectives from Everett Transit and from UPS about fleet-related and corporate initiatives around ZEV technology development. But for us at EPA, we have a slightly different tact on this technology and what the federal government can do to support its development. So I wanted to just touch on that rationale and some of the activities that we have at EPA in that space. So just jumping ahead to slide 3, here you can see all of the areas of the country that are out of attainment with one or more of our national ambient air quality standards, or the NAAQS. You can go to this link here at EPA's Green Book to dig a little bit deeper into areas that you might work in or live in to determine exactly what type of air quality conditions exist there. But really, EPA's mission is to protect public health and the environment. And one of the key drivers of our agency's interest in these technologies is that mission. And the areas of the country that currently have unhealthy air quality levels are really the markets that we want to focus on developing partnerships for deployment of these medium and heavy duty low and zero emission technologies. And just as an add-on to that, I wanted to show you some demographic data. Here you can see a population chart by EPA region. There's 10 EPA regions around the country. Again, I work for Region 9 in the Pacific Southwest, which is California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands. And you can see here that there's roughly 154 million people in the United States that as of 2018 that live in areas that don't meet one or more of the NAAQS. And so that's obviously one of the issues we deal with in the air program at EPA. And for our part at Region 9, 26% of the national non-attainment population is in our region. So that's a significant amount of people. And basically the upshot of this slide is about 47% of all Americans live in areas with unhealthy air quality. And our job at EPA is to try to deliver healthy air quality as soon as possible, and by all means feasible, to ensure that people have a chance at a healthy and long life. And just as another add-on data point there as to the why around medium and heavy duty powertrain development, here you can see the most recent data for US NOx emissions, or oxides of nitrogen, which are a key precursor to both ambient particulate matter, or fine particulates, PM 2.5, which are one of the most impactful pollutants for human health, as well as ground level ozone pollution, more commonly referred to as smog. And you can see here that in 2017, heavy duty on highway vehicles comprise about 12% of the national inventory. And you look at that to the next wedge for on highway for light duty vehicles, passenger cars and trucks at 17%. You can see why heavy duty vehicles are such a area of import for the agency. Given that in 2017, there were roughly 250, almost 251 million light duty vehicles registered in the United States versus 13.4 million heavy duty on highway vehicles in that same calendar year. That's about a 13x factor for the impact of each individual heavy duty on highway vehicle for NOx emissions in the country. So for every one heavy duty vehicle that you address with more low emission and zero emission technology, you're basically doing as you would for 13 light duty passenger vehicles. So again, that's a really big area of emphasis for us in trying to figure out technologies that can reduce NOx from heavy duty on highway vehicles. Similarly, for greenhouse gases, again, you can see our most recent public data here for 2018. And you can see here that 28% of national greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. And on-highway vehicles are responsible for about 80% of all the energy use and greenhouse gas emissions within the transportation sector. So again, looking at on-highway heavy duty and also light duty vehicles and trying to get cleaner technologies into that space helps us to address greenhouse gases and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Some of the activities that EPA has specifically on medium and heavy duty ZEV powertrain development, driven by the challenge again of needing medium and heavy duty reductions to address the NAAQS and mitigate climate change. So these are all vehicles heavier than 8,500 gross vehicle weight rating, so class 2B and above. We have our rulemaking under the Clean Air Act for our heavy duty greenhouse gas phase 2 standards, which were finalized in 2016. We're currently working on our Cleaner Trucks initiative with a notice of proposed rule coming out in the next couple of months. And then we also, as part of the National Ambient Air Standards State Implementation Plan, allow credit for state and local agencies for medium and heavy duty vehicle emission measures. We also have funding programs under our Diesel Emission Reduction Act, more commonly referred to as DERA, targeted airshed grant programs to address pollution in some of the most impacted airsheds, and then technical assistance and partnerships. And I'll dig into a piece of each one of these as I move through the remainder of this slide deck. So for heavy duty greenhouse gas phase 2, which again were finalized in 2016, we offered equipment manufacturers the ability to credit advanced technology multipliers for ZEV capable drivetrains as part of their compliance strategy through the 2027 model year. And in collaborations with our partners at the California Air Resources Board and a cost analysis that they conducted comparing internal combustion engine vehicles versus zero emission vehicles, we basically determined that these multipliers cited at the bottom of slide 8 were appropriate through 2027 to incent OEMs to basically manufacture more of them and make them available for sale in the United States to fleets. And you can see basically what this means is that for every zero emission capable vehicle, the manufacturer is able to multiply that emission factor times 3.5 to 5.5 for their averaging within our rule structure. And you can learn more about this rule and its different compliance pathways at the link cited there. Another note here is that EPA's mobile source rules are point source, they're not life cycle. So we don't take into account upstream emissions for battery electric or fuel cell electric vehicles as part of this particular rulemaking. An ongoing effort that EPA has under Section 202 of the Clean Air Act is revision of our heavy-duty vehicle NOx standards for on highway. And the last time these were revised were in 2001, fully implemented in model year 2010. And really our need for action is defined by our projections that heavy-duty vehicles will be the largest mobile source NOx contributor by 2025. NOx is a major contributor to ambient ozone and fine particulate across the country. And in 2016, several states and local agencies petitioned EPA to initiate a rulemaking for more stringent NOx standards for heavy-duty on-highway vehicles. And so we're currently working on that. We had an advance notice of proposed rule out earlier this year. Again, our next step is to issue a notice of proposed rulemaking that will be open for public comment within the next few months. And the objectives for our rule are listed here. But again, the real focus is on actual emissions in use for heavy-duty vehicles of NOx emissions to address ozone and PM. For funding, we have our DERA program, as I cited earlier, and that allows us to do retrofit, repower, and replacement, including for ZEV technologies, to reduce diesel emissions and human exposure, particularly in areas with pre-existing poor air quality. Our most recent RFA closed in February of this year, and we'll be announcing new awards later on this calendar year. In terms of the type of funding and what type of vehicles we can fund, you see here class 5 or larger on-highway vehicles are all eligible. There is a diesel scrappage requirement here, so you can either repower an existing diesel chassis to hydrogen fuel cell or battery electric, or you can replace the full vehicle. We also can fund the same type of technologies in locomotives, marine vessels, and in many types of non-road heavy-duty equipment. And for repowers, it's a cost share cap of 60% with no threshold. It really is a proportional cap, as well as for replacements, 45, with the exception of drayage trucks, which get a slight bump to 50. And again, you can look at the URLs that are listed throughout for more details on any of these programs. Also, our targeted airshed grant program, which the most recent funding opportunity closed in April, we had $106 million available for this program this year for the most polluted airsheds in the country for ozone and PM 2.5. We offer up to 100% EPA cost share for these projects, and you need to partner with a state or local or tribal air agency to access this funding. but all zero emission technologies are eligible under this program, and there isn't necessarily a scrappage requirement. We can fund pure deployment projects under this funding authority for EPA. Just a bit on planning and technical assistance, a project that we're working on under our West Coast Collaborative Public-Private Partnership for Diesel Reductions. I spoke about this on one of the previous Clean Cities webinars last month, so this may be familiar to some of you. But anyhow, under the existing Surface Transportation Act for the United States, Department of Transportation is directed to designate alt fuel corridors, including for plug-in electric and hydrogen fuel cell. And EPA's elected to partner with DOT on this program for some regional collaboration in the commercial vehicle space. And looking at what the state agencies have done for light-duty ZEVs along the West Coast, we thought leveraging those working relationships for the medium and heavy-duty sector made a lot of sense for the reasons listed here. And we've conducted some work with CalSTART to evaluate where project opportunities exist along the West Coast by reaching out to fleets and fueling infrastructure providers to determine where they want to see more of this type of infrastructure. Some of the key findings for that project, which was published in March of this year, for medium and heavy duty ZEV technology, so for EV charging infrastructure and hydrogen, we found 85 proposed stations from the Canadian to Mexican border for medium and heavy duty, so class 5 plus accessibility or larger. An estimated cost for capital expense of about $262 million to build all of those stations, and our partners indicated that up to 77% or more than 77% of all those proposals would be go, no go at an 80% cost share level. And that's relevant for many of the US DOT programs that we partner with. Typically for US DOT, 80% is the federal cost share cap for infrastructure projects. In addition, and looking at the clock, I have about 4 minutes left and I have 2 more slides. So we also at EPA partner in the California Fuel Cell Partnership. We're one of the charter members of this organization in Region 9, represented by myself, have been engaged in the partnership since 2011. And really one of our points of emphasis within this public-private partnership is accelerating development and deployment of medium and heavy-duty fuel cell and hydrogen technologies. Michael touched on this a little bit in his talk, but we really view hydrogen fuel cells as a more viable technology for many heavy-duty use cases, particularly in some of the heaviest, most energy-intensive use cases like long-haul Class 8 tractor trailers. We definitely see those being operationally viable more sooner than perhaps battery electric, and the infrastructure economics often are more attractive for hydrogen, and you still get zero-emission tailpipe performance from fuel cell technology. And reflective of that priority for mitigation of criteria pollutants and NAAQS attainment, and also the operational characteristics provided by fuel cell powertrains, we've worked with our partners at the Fuel Cell Partnership to develop 3 white papers over the last few years looking at buses and trucks and some of the actions that can be taken to accelerate their deployment. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this organization, it is comprised of vehicle manufacturers, infrastructure providers, fuel cell and hydrogen supply chain companies, non-governmental organizations, mostly from the environmental sector, and then also government agencies like EPA. And this is my last substantive slide. Wanted to highlight a good resource and a good partnership that's been developed by CalSTART in their Global Commercial Vehicle Drive to Zero campaign. And they maintain a availability inventory of medium and heavy duty zero emission technologies by geography. And so there's a link here that will show you based on where you are. North America, Canada is obviously the market that EPA focuses on, but also if you have partners in Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, they also are able to identify what technologies are available there as well. And really the unique characteristic of this program is that it's global in scale. It is a large coalition of a lot of different entities, and they're really trying to identify what market segments make sense now to try to build scale and build the supply chain to make ZEVs more economically viable for commercial vehicle and non-road applications. So it's a really interesting take on how you promote zero-emission commercial vehicles and how you build the markets for them so that they can grow without public sector subsidy. So that constitutes my briefing. Here's my contact information and a couple more reference links. here, feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions. And again, there's another dozen or so slides in here that show some other references that you may be interested in terms of VW settlement. There's a lot of interest in that. US DOE's funding, DOT, and others. So feel free to take a look at those when you have a chance. And thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, John. As always, I really enjoyed these presentations, not just as a moderator. I learn new information almost every time that I participate in one of these activities. So let's move on to any pending questions we have out there. I think most of the questions have been answered as the presentations progressed. But if there's any pending questions, let's get to them. And if anyone has any remaining questions, please throw them out there. I see one from Phil that just came in. Uh-oh. As quick as it came up, seemed like it was answered.
Yeah, Richard, I accidentally checked off Phil's question there. He was asking, is EPA working on renewable hydrogen? And obviously, yes, we're working with a variety of different entities to build a renewable hydrogen supply chain. You know, and there's a lot of misconceptions about both electricity and hydrogen in terms of life cycle emissions. And I want to assure folks that even when we're talking about steam methane reformation as the supply for hydrogen, when you compare that to diesel, you're talking about significant greenhouse gas reductions, life cycle, and you're also getting 0 PM and 0 NOx at the tailpipe in a use case that's really difficult to electrify with batteries. And so there's a lot of kind of infighting about what's better, what's worse, you know, and letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. And really for us at EPA, we're about the solutions that make sense as soon as possible, because there's a time value associated with emission reductions. You can't wait for the perfect all the time to be available in order for you to protect human health. You know, you want to work with fleets to develop the technologies that are the cleanest available now, and over time get cleaner and cleaner. So again, I think there's a lot of kind of misinformation and misconceptions about what is best and what is appropriate. And I want to assure people that when you're comparing against an internal combustion engine vehicle, fuel cells and plug-in electrics are cleaner technologies, full stop.
Well, thank you, John. I think there was a question about, which I was looking for, the duty cycles, differences between hydrogen fuel cell and battery electric, and was there a particular preference? And I know that's a difficult question to answer. And so I will just throw it out there. Hydrogen, fuel cell, and battery electric are comparable technologies. Mainly the deployments of these two technologies are taking place in the transit space. So it's really an operational decision by the deploying fleet to pick one technology versus the other. They both are proven platforms. They both have unique operating characteristics. And of course, primarily, you've got to be able to fuel your vehicles with whatever your choice is. So you have different components to go in. We here in the Bay Area have one of the longest running hydrogen fuel cell transit bus operations in the U.S., if not with AC Transit. They've seemed to work the bugs out of it. More recent deployments have involved battery electric, and we're seeing the different charging technologies being deployed, whether they return to the depot, whether they charge on the route. So there's a lot of different options available. And forgive me as I'm trying to maneuver my mouse with my laptop to make sure that we've got every question answered. The availability of the slide deck, I think that's good. Here's an anonymous attendee asking, can you talk a little bit about the future of medium-duty, heavy-duty vehicles as a grid resource? And I think that one might be directed to you, John.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. I'd also like to hear Michael and Tony's takes since they actually operate vehicles. So I'll pause there and see if they have some thoughts on that, and I'll jump in if I have anything to add.
Yeah, this is Mike from UPS. We're familiar with the concept of you charge your vehicle, you go out, if you come back in, you have like 50% left, that you can reverse it and put the power back into the grid, and I guess get some kind of benefit. Would it be some kind of credit for electricity, or you have, you come back, say 50%, and you maybe put the 50% into your battery storage, and that way when the peak hours come up, you need to charge, you can just pull the energy out of your battery storage and put it back in your truck. So yeah, we have looked at it. We are familiar with it. We do know there are folks like Oak Ridge who are working on like the bi-directional charging plate, which we're involved in that project. So I do know the technology is out there, and it is something that's being looked at. I know in I forget if it's South Korea or Japan, that they actually do that, where their vehicles can actually be support the grid. And I think the concept was, if you had some kind of natural disaster where you were lacking energy, that if you had enough vehicles or whatever, you could actually put energy back into the grid for use somewhere else. So that's kind of our take on it.
Thank you, Michael. Tony, did you have some thoughts on demand response, vehicle to grid, or smart charging?
The only thing I can say on it is that it would be for future planning, because our infrastructure here, where Everett Transit currently parks their buses at night, is not set up at all for this kind of setup. The buses are not capable of it yet. Also, vehicle to grid is something that they are looking at doing on their new base. If we ever get to build a new base, because the cost of adding it here would be extraordinary. It's way cheaper to build into a new base. So that was kind of the plan, to eventually put that into the buses at the new base, but we're talking 10, 15, 20 years down the line, probably.
Thank you, Tony. John, did you have something to add?
I do, and I think those are really good comments from folks who manage facilities and fleets. And I think from our perspective, there's an opportunity here, obviously at the fleet level, and we're doing a variety of different pilots in that space now, particularly with school bus fleets on V2G. And there's a number of different utility policy issues that are to be dealt with. And obviously the capital expense barrier is significant, as Tony just highlighted. But one of the things I did want to touch on is kind of the relationship with the last question, is the relationship between excess renewables and storage and vehicles, and also renewable hydrogen and excess renewables. And one of the things that we're looking at now is hydrogen as an energy service for wind and solar versus battery storage, because you have the benefit of generating a renewable fuel that can also be an on-demand energy source. So you kind of get a twofer there. And then in addition to that, you have the ability, if on site, if you have renewable distributed generation, to have your vehicles connected. And particularly for heavy duty vehicles with large battery assemblies, there's a really clear synergy of the domicile periods overlay with peak demand periods. So school buses, for example, have a tendency to be dormant during the middle of the day when the sun is shining. And they have the ability to store that energy either for motive effort or for demand response later in the evening when they're again dormant.
Yes, thank you, John. And just to sort of wrap that up from the Clean Cities perspective, well, of course, being in California, we operate in a bit of a different environment. But there are some active V2G projects out there. They're mostly on microgrids right now, but the technology's been proven. You have to have compatible vehicles as well as charging infrastructure. But to me, and this is maybe a personal opinion, the applicability in medium heavy duty space is probably ideal. School bus has almost, like John just mentioned, an optimal duty cycle, goes out in the morning, sits for a long time, goes out in the afternoon. So while that bus is sitting, it can be used as a power source. And I think as the battery technology progresses, and this is true not just with vehicles, but also with stationary storage like facilities, we're going to see vehicles looked more as mobile power sources. And when the cost is coming down, I kind of envision, and maybe it's 10 years like Tony said, but folks will spec their battery electric vehicles with excess capacity because it will be part of an integrated energy management system that includes facility power storage, that includes vehicle battery storage. So as we refine this process, it focuses on the capacity to use renewables more efficiently. And really the key to doing that at this point is having storage. So anyway, I got a little bit off topic. I want to wrap this up just with a little note on renewable diesel and renewable gasoline, particularly renewable diesel. This is a technology that's been around for a while. It's deployed massively here in California, and you can expect to see it in other parts of the country. This is a fuel that's virtually indistinguishable from petroleum diesel. It's truly a drop-in fuel. It's something we haven't seen as long as I've been doing this. We've been waiting for the downside to manifest, and it hasn't happened. Right now, the cost is the only thing preventing renewable diesel from being available across the country. And the big news is major petroleum refiners are getting into this space in a big way. It was kind of quiet, but Phillips 66 just announced plans. It's here in Northern California. It will be the largest renewable fuel production facility when they convert their Rodeo, California refinery. So it's, once the big players start moving in the space, it's proven technology. UPS was a leader. We commend them for their leadership on this issue, and I'll share with everyone else on the call, this presentation. Once UPS adopts a fuel, you can rest assured that they've tested that thing every way to Sunday. And when their trucks don't roll, they don't make money, and they're definitely focused on sustainability, but make no mistakes, UPS has it down to a science, and they won't deploy an alternative fuel if it's not viable, but more importantly, if it's not cost effective. So with that, I think this will conclude. Oh, wait a minute, there's one more question, last one. For Michael, how is UPS integrating charging opportunities with outside partners or contractors?
Well, we have an energy team who actually engages with the different companies to see what they offer as far as infrastructure, as far as turnkey solutions, even as far as like the energy companies themselves, like Duke Energy and stuff like that. So we have a separate team who actually does the legwork and interviews and the back and forth with these folks. That's not, I know just enough to be dangerous, but that's not my lane. So I leave it up to the people who deal with that every day.
Yep, I hear you. There's many options out there in the electric vehicle charging infrastructure space. Again, here in California, maybe we operate in a bubble, and it might be different in other parts of the country, but typically the infrastructure's not really a difficult part of the equation. It's more a question of the power being available at the location where you want to put it. And then, of course, there are the different SAE formats when you get into DC fast charging. But other than that, again, I know we've gone a little bit over time. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. I particularly want to thank our three speakers, Tony Cademarti, Michael McDonald, and John Mikulin. It's been wonderful. To everyone on the phone or online, please stay tuned. We have additional offerings coming up in the near future. In particular, the Green Transportation Summit and Expo, GTSE, has some wonderful opportunities coming up. There are specific offerings in the technician training space related to alternative fuels. So we hope to see you in the future. Once again, this is Richard Battersby on behalf of the Long Beach, Columbia, Willamette, San Francisco, Western Washington, Utah, and East Bay Clean Cities Coalition. Thank you for joining us today.